Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Israel Brief. I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, where we take a look at those top stories every Monday to Thursday, and we do it in partnership with these guys, Lay of the Land. Now, I'm sure you can tell by the tone of my voice that this is a more somber edition of the Israel Brief, and I want to be upfront and warn you that today's edition of the Israel Brief contains distressing content. I will be bringing you some of the testimony from the hostages that were released over the weekend. The testimony is extremely upsetting, and I want you to be forewarned about it. Today is day 493. There are still 76 hostages that remain captive in the Gaza Strip. We want them out now. Let's start with your top stories. On Saturday, 3 male hostages were released from captivity where they had been held by Hamas in the most horrific and inhumane conditions for 491 days. Eli Sharabi, Ohad Ben-Ami, and Or Levi. Or was abducted on the 7th of October from a migonit, one of the roadside shelters, where he and his wife and others who had been to the Nova Festival took shelter to hide from the incoming rockets. Or didn't know, in the mayhem that ensued, that his wife Einav, the mother of his 3-year-old son Almog, had been slaughtered by Hamas. Or was taken captive along with Hirsch Pauline Goldberg, and we found out afterwards that Or didn't know that Hirsch had been killed. He thought Hirsch maybe had been released. Eli Sharabi, a father of 2 beautiful girls, was taken captive from Kibbutz Be'eri. He also didn't know until he was released that his wife Leanne and 2 daughters, Yahel and Noah, had also been murdered by Hamas along with the family dog. His brother Yossi was also taken captive and murdered in captivity. Hamas still held his body. And Ohad Ben-Ami was taken captive from Kibbutz Be'eri, along with his wife Raz, who was released in the hostage releases in November 2023, and he came home to his family. The thoughts of their families sustained these 3 men in the pits of hell in the darkest hours. Nothing could have prepared us for the images of the 3 men that we saw when they were released in Deir al-Bala on Saturday. I must be honest, when Ohad stepped out of the car, barely walking, I gasped. All 3 men look extremely emaciated, struggling to walk, and you can see how their faces had sunken in. To Israelis, it reminded us of the time of our ancestors when these Allied forces arrived at places like Auschwitz and Majdanek and other death camps and concentration camps to liberate them, the walking skeletons. That's what these 3 men look like. I don't think I have adequate words to describe the pain that this imagery has put in all of us, to the point where now we want all of our hostages released immediately. The 3 men were then forced to stand on the stage. Amazing how Hamas has those stages, complete with voluptuous woman who throws around her petals, and masked gunmen in pristine uniforms, big, burly, some of them slightly overweight. I saw evidence of starvation in the Gaza Strip, the starvation that we've been hearing about for 16 months. And the starvation belonged to the 3 men, the 3 Israeli men who were held hostage. The Red Cross signed for their charges, shook the hands of Hamas, put them in their vehicles, and took them to the meeting point where thankfully they were met by our soldiers and brought back to safety in Israeli territory. Now I just want to have a word about the Red Cross. The Red Cross have done nothing in 16 months. No welfare checks, no delivery of medicine, no medical checks, no demanding to see the hostages. We've had many an excuse from them. They have, however, demanded to film the Palestinian prisoners as they are being released from Israeli jails, many of them serving multiple life sentences for crimes of terror. Some of them don't want to leave the jail. They're quite happy and comfortable there with their meals and their studies and all the benefits that they get. To the Red Cross, you are complicit in crimes against humanity. You are behaving exactly now as you did in the Second World War during the Holocaust. I do recall a time earlier in this war where the Red Cross president met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who tried to hand her some medicine and she recoiled. She wouldn't even touch the bags. She said they had no way of access to our hostages. She had a different attitude when she met Ismail Haniyeh in Qatar and bowed to him in greeting. I hold the Red Cross complicit in crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity is exactly what President Herzog said when he saw this, speaking about how upsetting and distressing it was. The three men were made to address the crowd, cheering and shouting Allahu Akbar. And while it hasn't been reported what Ohad was made to say or what Or was made to say, we do know that Eli was told that his brother Yossi was murdered in captivity while the crowd cheered. And we heard him speak about how happy he was to be reunited with his family. Neither Or nor Eli knew that their beloved wives, and in Eli's case his daughters as well, were murdered. I don't think any of us can imagine what it's like to return from hell, to go back into that kind of hell, a different kind of hell. The global response has been disappointing, to say the least. The same world leaders that gathered in Auschwitz just 2 weeks ago to say never again have barely acknowledged the condition that our hostages were released in. No blame has been apportioned to Hamas. No horror has been expressed at the emaciated state that these three men were released in. I've seen nothing from Australia. I've seen a lukewarm response from the Foreign Ministry of Canada saying that they're happy the hostages were released. And Keir Starmer maybe expressed concern at what Eli looks like, but there was no blame to Hamas, and of course, the normal call for humanitarian aid. I tell you who did not receive any humanitarian aid were our hostages. As I said just now, and I'm going to say it again, I only saw evidence of 3 starving people in the Gaza Strip, and those were our hostages. So I'm going to read to you now from the testimonies. You are warned, this is very distressing. The hostages were chained for months, unable to walk or stand. One hostage had to relearn how to walk after being released from his shackles. They were held barefoot in the dark, suffocating tunnels with no air or sunlight. They slept on the filthy ground and were often deprived of water for drinking or washing for weeks at a time. Beatings and violent abuse were routine, with some hostages suffering gunshot wounds that went untreated. There were also reports of them being burnt and hung upside down. Food was used as a weapon. Hostages were only given a quarter of a pita bread per day, if at all. Most lost between 15 to 20 kilograms from starvation and malnutrition. Before their release, Hamas increased their food intake to hide the severe emaciation of the captives. We have heard alarming reports from our health ministry, and we know that the feeding protocols that were administered to Holocaust survivors are now being researched so that we can start the process for these 3 men. Hamas played sadistic release games, falsely telling hostages they were about to be freed only to laugh in their faces and choose others instead. They were forced to beg for access to a toilet, sometimes granted permission only twice a day. Hostages were kept in total isolation from the outside world, relying only on Hamas's manipulative misinformation. Some did not know their families had been murdered until after their release. One hostage begged for another captive to be released instead of him, unable to bear leaving his fellow prisoners behind. They feared every day was their last, as Hamas terrorists routinely threatened them at gunpoint. They endured daily beatings, humiliation, and the constant terror of execution. They reported being taken for interrogation, being strangled, having rags across their mouth till they could hardly breathe. Many could barely walk from weakness when they were finally released. And our worry is that there are still 76 that remain in captivity. We know not all of them are alive, but the ones who are alive, we want them now. Earlier today, Israel's negotiating team returned from Doha, and the Security Cabinet will meet later today. The families of hostages, including the parents of the late Hirsch, Paul and Goldberg, have demanded that now all of the live hostages have to be released at once we saw the conditions that these hostages emerged in. President Trump seems to be the only world leader who has called it as it is. He said his patience is running out. These hostages look like survivors of the Holocaust. I don't know what to say. The pain that we are experiencing here in Israel is enormous. We've heard from Holocaust survivors who say that this takes them back, right back to those days that they were starved and tortured and released like walking skeletons. President Trump has doubled down on his plans to take over the Gaza Strip and said he will allow other countries to develop it as well. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that Gazans will be allowed to return to Gaza should President Trump's plan go through, only if they renounce terror. I'm sure you can all see, because we can all see with our own eyes, despite the many attempts by many around the world to deny what they saw on Saturday, that we cannot allow for Hamas to continue to exist as an entity on our border and do it again and again and again as they have threatened to do. This has been a very different edition of the Israel Brief. I thank so many of you out there for your resolute support of our hostages, your prayers for standing with the state of Israel. I'm going to end with a question from Valerie, who wants to know, military service, is it compulsory for men and women? And will the hostages return to the IDF? And I'm choosing to take this question today because never again will we be defenseless. The world said never again, and the world has failed us. And it is evident that we can only rely on ourselves for our own defense and protection. Well, Valerie, military service is compulsory for men and women. Women serve a slightly shorter time than the men. And with regards to hostages going back, former hostages Agam Goldstein and Ori Megadish have gone back into service. It was reported in one of the Israeli channels that the observation soldiers that were released, the ladies, that they want to go back into service. They're not obligated to. Their well-being, their health is far more important. But if they do go back into service, it sends a message to the world, and we salute these extraordinary women. I'm sure if they seek to leave the military, you can bet they will get an honorable discharge. So that's it from me for today from the Israel Brief. I ask you, please, please, to continue to pray and to shout, and as Aviva Siegel says, to scream for our hostages. Please don't forget to check out our website at www.laoftheland.online, our Facebook page at Lottel's site. Our YouTube channel is here at the Israel Brief. We're on LinkedIn at Rolene Marks, on Instagram at Rolene_Marks. And guys, God bless you all. Thank you for standing with us, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye for now.